Mr. Hale, your west scrubber line is running hot and the hydrofluoric monitors are flirting with alarm thresholds. You need to shut the unit down now, said the night janitor in a voice so steady it cut through the thrum of the Crown Petrochem control room. Victor Hale, 58, plant director of the largest refinery on the eastern seaboard, kept his gaze on the wall of screens like a man ignoring weather reports from inside a storm. He didn't turn. He didn't have to. He knew the voice. The man with the mop who had started offering opinions he hadn't paid for. "You clean floors, Ortega," Victor said finally, the corners of his mouth tightening. "I run reactors. Stay in your lane." Luis Ortega didn't flinch. 45, shoulders squared by years of lifting more than his share and a mind sharpened by a career he no longer listed on forms. He stood there with his cart, a $5 PH strip peeking out of his shirt pocket like a quiet provocation. No badge, no title, but his eyes tracked the same numbers Victor's did, and a few the director had trained himself to ignore. On monitor 4, a heat map pulsed a yellow that wanted to be orange. On 7, vibration data from a pump assembly danced just a hair above baseline. On 13, a gas monitor readouts rolled past like a language some people never bothered to learn. "Look at the drift," Luis said softly, almost to himself. 4 days, one direction. Victor laughed under his breath, a noise without humor. "Adrift? You picked that up while polishing stainless steel?" What Victor didn't know, what he refused to know, was that the night janitor had spent 16 years as a process safety engineer before a contractor's scapegoating and a board that preferred easy answers pushed him out. Luis had written papers Victor had cited in meetings without realizing the author was the man refilling the paper towels in the executive restroom. If you've ever been told your knowledge is an inconvenience, you know the discipline it takes to keep speaking anyway. Luis didn't argue. He did what he had learned to do when power mistook silence for consent. He documented. He had started 3 weeks ago when the hairline cracks on the tower casing looked like spider webs drawn by a nervous hand. He noted the times. He captured photos when no one was watching. He taped pH strips inside the janitor's closet where condensate dripped, shades of pink deepening with a story nobody wanted to read. "Finish your route," Victor said, dismissing him with the flick of his fingers, the gesture of a man who believed gravity could be negotiated. "And don't hover in my control room." Luis nodded. He left the control room not because he had been ordered to, but because the hallway camera didn't cover the corner where the drain trap was sweating. He knelt, slipped the pH strip into the trickle, and watched the color swing hard. Acid. He wrote the number in a notebook scarred by coffee and a life he was still carrying forward. He was invisible until the moment he refused to be. 3 days earlier, during a safety walkthrough he had no right to join, he had heard the phrasing that told him everything about priorities. The neighbors liked the donation checks, not alarms, the public affairs director had said in a tone of practiced lightness. Low profiles look safe on paper. In steel, they look like deferred maintenance. Luis rinsed the strip with bottled water, patted the drain dry with a rag, and tucked the notebook away. At the far end of the corridor, a young operator he didn't know by name, because nobody had introduced them, was laughing into his phone, back turned to a placard about evacuation routes. The red arrows pointed to exits that had been blocked for months by pallets of new parts still in shrink wrap. Back in the service closet, Luis pulled out his old phone. Not the one on his time card file in HR, but the ancient one with a cracked screen and an app he'd written for himself years ago. He entered the numbers. The app didn't care about titles. It cared about trends. 4 days, one direction. He took a breath, then did what his job description didn't cover. He called someone who would understand. "Dr. Saini?" "Yes?" The voice came crisp and alert, the way voices get when they've been waking for emergencies longer than anyone appreciates. It's Luis from the community night class. I need a brain with more gray hair than mine. There was a pause, then a chuckle. Flattery neutralizes curiosity for exactly 3 seconds. Now I'm curious. Talk. We're seeing rising HF on the west scrubber line. Monitors haven't tripped, but they're skating. Heat drift on the tower shell, vibration just above acceptable on piece 7. I'm catching acid in the drains. Silence. Then the word Luis knew she would pick. Pattern. One direction, he said, not a spike, a slide. That's worse, Dr. Mira Sayini said. Spikes scare executives. Slides, they excuse. Mira had retired from the university 2 years earlier after 30 years teaching process safety to engineers who still texted her photos of gauges when their hands shook. 61, white hair clipped short, wardrobe a rotation of shirts that didn't stain easily. She had accumulated enemies who respected her and friends who listened when she said 2 words, shut down. You told them? She asked. The director told me to mop. Of course he did. Bring me what you have, not an email, paper, photos, dates. If the pattern is real, we don't ask twice. Luis glanced at the clock, 2:07 a.m. He had 3 more floors and a cafeteria to sanitize for people who would never wonder how it gleamed. He thought of his daughter asleep 2 bus lines away, the folder of overdue notices on their kitchen table, and the box of old diplomas he hadn't had the heart to throw out. I'll meet you at Gray's Diner after shift. I'll bring coffee and a pen that bleeds through lies, Mira replied and hung up. In the control room, Victor cracked his neck and zoomed into trend lines, willing them to flatten, the way men will their blood pressure to behave when an appointment is on the calendar. He'd been in this industry long enough to know that no plant was perfect. He'd also been here long enough to know how to talk about inevitabilities like they were choices. He prided himself on never flinching, not because he was brave, but because he believed flinching was what made people notice. He did not notice the janitor's cart parked under the camera, its handle angled away from the lens. He did not notice the slightly darker arc of concrete where condensate had been cleansing its path. He didn't notice how much of his attention was being spent on the story he would tell if anyone asked why he ignored the drift. Power teaches you how to talk about risk without smelling it. The Crown Petrochem complex covered 6 miles of pipes, towers, flare stacks, and the quiet hum of electricity moving like weather. It fed a city's engines and a handful of fortunes. At its center, the West Scrubber Line drew volatile gases into towers that were supposed to tame them. Hydrofluoric acid lurked there, invisible, impatient, the chemical equivalent of a lawyer with time and motive. If it leaked, it did not announce itself with colorful smoke. It simply erased what it touched. Luis had loved this world once. He had loved the math more, equations that could be relied upon to tell the truth if you fed them numbers instead of wishes. He had drawn his first P&ID in a kitchen chair with a baby monitor twitching beside coffee gone cold. He had also learned that equations did not testify at depositions when contractors needed a scapegoat and boardrooms had already decided who would be cheap to blame. You're good, his last manager had said, eyes almost apologetic, but you're not essential to them. Invisible is a word that covers many sins. By 3 a.m., Luis had finished his route. He clocked out with a hand that didn't shake and stepped into a night that smelt like rain and industrial soap. Gray's Diner sat 3 blocks from the gate, the kind of place where the coffee was survivable and nobody looked twice if you brought a binder at an hour when normal people dream. Mira was already there, a pen behind her ear and a notebook open to a blank page that had the energy of a verdict. She waved him over without standing, her eyes flicking to the folder in his hand. "Show me," she said. He did. Photos taken with care, notes that read like someone trying to be believed on the first try. He slid a hand-drawn map across the Formica. The West Scrubber Line traced in blue, circles around places where the air felt wrong. She didn't interrupt. When she did speak, it was to ask one question, the way surgeons cut, directly. Who ignores you? Director Hale. Who does he listen to? Luis hesitated. His daughter, Nadia, public affairs. She knows how to frame everything. Good, Mira said. We'll give her something she can't frame. The board won't act without a trigger, Luis said. They need a moment they can't spin as within tolerances. Then we plan the moment. Not a disaster, a demonstration. You don't change systems by wishing the virtuous outcome. You engineer it. They worked for an hour. Mira sketched a list with the discipline of a woman who learned which sequence saves lives. Gather corroboration, 2 other operators' anonymous observations, not gossip, data. You want to ambush him, Luis said. Not quite a question. I want to put truth where performance cannot ignore it, Mira said. Call it what you want. At 4:15 a.m., Luis walked back into the dark thinning toward morning. He felt something he hadn't let himself feel in months. Not hope, exactly, but its older cousin, the resolve that doesn't wait for permission. What he didn't know was that someone else had already chosen a side. In a corner office that faced the flare stack like a man staring down a lighthouse, Nadia Hale watched a loop of drone footage for an investor video. 32, polished, sharper than her father liked to admit, she'd learned to speak corporate dialects like she'd learned to ride a bike. Balance, momentum, and the knowledge that falling hurts less when you don't tense. She had also learned, slowly, and against her own bias, that the story you tell and the story you live are not always married. The janitor had slipped her an envelope once. No return address, no theatrics, just photos and notes that looked like homework graded by time. She had not thrown it away. She had read it under a desk lamp at midnight while her father snored in the next room. She had recognized, with the certainty that comes when the part of you trained to protect reputation is nailed to the floor by the part trained to protect lives, that the observations were real. She also recognized that bringing them to her father would turn a hallway into a war. Nadia scrolled through emails, investors, city council, a community group that had learned how to make noise without getting arrested. Her finger hovered over a name, Council Member Rivera, chair of the Public Safety Committee who had been a paramedic before politics taught him that budgets could be weapons. She closed the laptop and picked up her phone, then put it down, then picked it up again. Courage is often just the time between your first and second thought. Dad, she texted, instead. Softer battlefield. What's the plan for the investor tour with regard to the West Line? We should do a safety emphasis. Optics. The dots pulsed, then stopped, then pulsed. We're fine, came the reply. Within tolerances, don't spook people. She stared at the words that had been her inheritance. Within tolerances. They made disasters legal until they were headlines. At dawn, the plant exhaled the way large machines do when night crew becomes day crew and everyone pretends the place is less dangerous in sunlight. Luis met the 2 operators Mira had suggested at the fence line. They were young, exhausted, and trying to learn how to make a living without becoming part of the machinery they tended. We don't sign anything, one of them said, eyes flicking to the gate camera. You don't need to, Luis said. You point, I'll write. If I'm wrong, I'll burn the notes myself. They walked the perimeter like men tracing a scar. One pointed out a hairline stain on a concrete plinth. Another mentioned a smell he couldn't name, sweet and wrong, like a promise rotting. He didn't correct their language. He collected it. By noon, his binder was heavy. By 2, a small box from a local lab sat under his sink. chain of custody forms signed, and analysis requests for condensate samples worded in terms tight enough to survive skeptical eyes. At 3, Mira emailed a letter, 2 pages, clear and unadorned, addressed to the board's compliance chair with a subject line that would be hard to ignore. Observations suggesting progressive HF release risk on West Scrubber system. Immediate mitigations recommended. At 4, Nadia stood in her father's doorway. "We need a safety emphasis for tomorrow's tour," she said, voice perfectly neutral. Victor looked up, annoyance hovering like a habit. "You texted," I answered. "Optics," she said. "Bring the message to them before they make one for us." He held her gaze for a beat. "You've been talking to the neighbors too much." "I've been listening," she said. His eyes slid past her toward the window, where the flare stack cut a brilliant knife of daylight. "We're fine." Sometimes a phrase is a lullaby for grown men who cannot sleep without lying to themselves. That night, rain began as if the sky had finally remembered the ocean. The plant glistened in it, every light haloed, every surface confessing where it was weak. Louise cleaned the executive hallway with the steady rhythm of someone who understood that rituals are how you carry yourself through days when you were not being seen. He finished, parked the cart, and sat on a bench by a vending machine that made all beverages taste like aluminum. He opened his notebook and wrote a single sentence at the bottom of a crowded page. "We give them one chance to choose the safe path in front of people they cannot dismiss." He closed the notebook. He tried not to think about the last time he had believed that truth in the right room would be enough. Morning came with a sun that looked like forgiveness and felt like humidity. Vans rolled through the gate, investors in crisp shirts, cameras, hard hats handed out like talismans, as if equipment could substitute for attention. Nadia curated the group with the ease of someone who could make a map look like a destination. She smiled where necessary, redirected questions with the grace of a fencer. Victor walked at the front, jaw set, a man leading a tour of a house he built while ignoring the creak in the floor. Luis kept his distance. He had a badge for access nobody questioned because nobody questioned him. He moved ahead of the group by routes only someone who cleaned understood. He checked the exits, 3 clear, 2 not. He moved the pallets himself, breath measured, back complaining. He taped new evacuation maps over old ones because the arrows had changed while nobody was watching. Mira arrived alone, a visitor sticker crooked on her shirt like a warning label. She stood near the rear, taking in the facility not as spectacle, but as anatomy. When she caught Luis's eye, she didn't nod, too visible. She lifted her pen instead. Ready. At the base of the West Scrubber Tower, Victor stopped the group for a speech. He had given it a dozen times. He could deliver it even if the power cut, which was often how speeches were written. "We pride ourselves," he began, "on exceeding regulatory standards. Our safety record is—" The wind shifted. It did not blow anyone over. It did not lift hats. It merely took the air and turned it so that what had been moving away now hesitated. Mira saw it before she felt it. A shimmer in the rain, a pattern in the way droplets slid down steel, refusing to bead where they should. She didn't wait for Victor to finish the sentence that no longer had the right to be completed. "Stop," she said, voice flat and carrying. "Clear the area now." People don't like being told to leave when they came to be impressed. They look around, seeking permission to disobey. They scanned faces for someone to mirror. Lewis didn't search. He moved. He began ushering people backward with the confidence of a man who had already decided how he would live with himself if he was wrong. He pointed to exits he had cleared. He did not shout. He did not panic. He performed a choreography he had practiced in his head since 2:07 a.m. the day before. Victor cursed. Confusion cracked into anger. "What do you think you're doing? We're within tolerances," Mira said, turning on him. "Your tolerances don't negotiate with HF. Move." That was when the alarm finally tripped. A sound built for factories, not ears. It rolled across steel and skin, obliterating negotiations. What happened next would be described in reports as an orderly evacuation with minimal injury. In truth, it was the difference between people who had been paying attention to exits that morning and people who learned in real time how to follow instructions when there was no time left for debate. Luis watched a junior operator freeze, eyes fixed on the tower, as if staring at the source could change its mind. He grabbed the young man's elbow and steered him toward the gate with a grip that promised the conversation could happen later, so long as the lungs still worked. Nadia counted heads, lips moving, learning in her bones what it means to be responsible for faces you invited. She met her father's eyes across a river of moving people. For a heartbeat, she saw something unfamiliar there. Not pride, not certainty. Just a man climbing down from a story that stopped holding his weight. Outside the gate, rain turned to a fine mist. Sirens approached. Cameras did what cameras always do. Pointed at what they were told, then wandered toward the people telling them not to. Mira handed a firefighter a page torn from her notebook. HF risk, west line, vents are there. The wind is doing this. She drew an arrow. Don't let them stage there. She did not wait for permission to stand next to the incident commander. You don't ask to be useful, you show up and are. Victor stood under a canopy, drenched not from rain, but from a realization that rarely visits men in time to save anything. He had been warned. He looked for Luis. He found him by the gate, soaked, breathing hard, writing the time on the back of his hand with a Sharpie because his notebook had become an umbrella for somebody else's child. "You," he said, and the word broke into 2 pieces. Luis didn't answer. Some speeches don't deserve a witness. What he knew, and what Victor would learn, was simple. The sharpest reply to contempt is competence, demonstrated when it matters most. They would file reports. They would convene boards. They would try to remold the story into something the investors could digest. But a camera had caught something unspinnable. A janitor leading an evacuation while a director tried to finish a sentence. And that was only the beginning. 3 hours later, with the all clear finally declared and the air tasting like metal in relief, Luis sat on a curb outside the gate. Mira lowered herself beside him with a groan of someone whose joints had earned better. They didn't speak first. Silence is not empty after a thing like that. It's a ledger being balanced. "You staged it without staging it," Mira said. "Sometimes the world cooperates." "Sometimes it demands to be seen," Luis said. He rubbed at the ink on his hand. The time had smudged. The memory would not. Across the street, Nadia argued with a man whose suit was priced for air conditioning, not rain. He gestured in ways that were meant to be persuasive. Nadia did not move. She had the stillness of someone who has chosen which side of the story to live on. "You should go home," Mira said. "Sleep while the powerful discover their verbs, investigate, mitigate, communicate." "I'll sleep when I copy my notes. Once to paper,
once to a PDF that doesn't exist until it has to. Mira smiled, tired and proud. Documentation is a lifeboat. Build it before the water rises. Luis stood. His legs protested. His resolve did not. He picked up his binder, heavier with rain and consequence, and started toward the bus stop. Behind him, Victor stared at the tower that almost chose a different ending for all of them. He thought of tolerances. He thought of the word acceptable and how it had been working for him until it didn't. What he didn't realize yet was that the numbers had not been the only things trending. His authority had been sliding too, visibly now, toward a reckoning with people he had never learned to see. The camera crews drifted away, the sirens stopped, the plant settled into a posture that could be mistaken for calm if you hadn't heard the alarm. Luis boarded the bus, sat by a window streaked with rain, and let the city glide past like a film that had replaced the real mid-scene.
As the bus pulled away, he took out his notebook. At the top of a new page, he wrote, "We will not ask power for decency. We will force it to practice it, publicly." He underlined it once. Then he began listing names. This was not revenge. It was something sturdier. The intention to make sure the next warning would not require an alarm. He closed the notebook when his stop arrived. He would sleep. He would wake. He would write again. The hardest work had not started yet. And the people who had called him invisible were about to learn how quickly a camera can make a man very visible indeed. The morning after the alarm, the city awoke to a headline that tasted like metal. Near miss at Crown Petrochem during investor tour. Janitor leads evacuation. It was the kind of sentence that wrote itself into people's coffee, then lived in their mouths all day. Victor Hale read it 3 times, as if repetition could bend the nouns. He sat in his office with the blinds half closed, the room lit like a confession booth. A printout of the article lay on his desk beside a stack of reports, some of which mattered, and some of which only looked like they did. He was a man built by pressure and decisions made under it, but the pressure he had calibrated for was the pressure of valves, not the pressure of camera lenses trained on his gait. "We need a statement," Nadia said, standing in the doorway with a tablet hugged to her chest, like a shield. "We followed protocol. We evacuated. We'll investigate. We need to acknowledge the warning. The one you received before the alarm." Victor's jaw moved, a small thing, the kind of movement that precedes a denial practiced on mirrors. "I receive warnings every day. Most of them are noise." "This one wasn't," Nadia said. He looked past her to the slice of sky between blinds. "What, you think I don't know that?" What he didn't say was that the world had rearranged him overnight. Pride does not dissolve in one rainstorm. It cracks, then finds the fracture line every time a voice like Mira's says a sentence that ends with a period instead of a question mark. Across town, Luis stood in his kitchen staring at his binder, as if it might stand up and speak for itself. The lab envelope lay open, chain of custody forms annotated, the printout stapled at an angle. Hydrofluoric acid present in condensate samples from auxiliary drains along West Scrubber Corridor. Concentration elevated relative to historical baselines. Recommendation, immediate inspection and isolation. He took a photo of the report and sent it to one person, Mira. No caption. The numbers were the caption. Her reply arrived in seconds. "Bring hard copy to council. 2 p.m. Rivera will put it on the record." Luis felt his throat tighten in a way that had nothing to do with chemicals. On the record were 3 words that changed the moral temperature of a city block. He wasn't naive. Records could be buried, but buried things had a way of being dug up when air and anger aligned. At the plant, the safety team convened a meeting in a windowless room that had seen more donuts than decisions. 12 people, a projector, a set of slides scavenged from 3 years of compliance training.
Victor sat at the head, not because the chair was different, but because everyone else sat where their fear told them to. "We need to control the narrative," said the legal counsel, a man whose hair had the precise gray of a wolf in winter. "We don't need a narrative," Mira said from the corner, where she had chosen to stand. "We need facts and actions." Legal frowned. "And you are—" "The person whose sentence saved your quarterly guidance from becoming a eulogy." Victor closed his eyes for a heartbeat. "Dr. Saini is consulting on this. She speaks plainly. Get used to it." "We have lab data," Mira continued, stepping forward and placing a copy of the report on the table with a sure hand. "External, chain of custody, condensate and auxiliary drains show HF. That is not noise. That is a signal. Your monitors are late to peril. Your maintenance backlog is not a spreadsheet. It is a map to the next alarm." An engineer at the far end of the table cleared his throat. "We had corrosion reports last quarter, deferred until turnaround. The vendor will not be in the room when a family asks why they can't breathe. Neither will your quarterly savings." Victor's gaze scanned faces. He recognized the calculus happening behind eyes. Budgets versus headlines, bonuses versus funerals. He felt for the first time in months the old clarity tug at him, the one that made him choose caution when he was a younger man without a suit that knew his shape. "We shut the west line," he said. The room stilled. "Today, full isolation, external inspection, replace what we've been meaning to. And we tell people we're doing it." Legal opened his mouth, then closed it. He was a man who won games of chicken by seeing who blinked. He was discovering that Mira didn't blink, and Victor wasn't willing to watch her not. "It will cost," the finance officer said softly, as if money were a timid animal that needed coaxing to be named. "So will the alternative, in more currencies than you can count." At 1:45 p.m., Luis stood outside City Hall with his binder pressed to his ribs. He was early by design. Early gave him time to remember his feet belonged to a man who was right more often than people in suits like to admit. Mira arrived precise as a metronome, a folder under her arm, a pen behind her ear, eyes taking in everything and only commenting on what needed changing. "You brought the original," she said. "And copies," Luis replied. "Good." She glanced at the steps where cameras huddled like gulls. "When they ask you a question, answer the one they didn't think to ask. The truth that isn't rehearsed is the truth that moves people." Councilmember Rivera's hearing room smelled faintly of floor polish and policy. A dozen people sat behind microphones that made their words feel official even when they weren't. The dais was a half moon, the kind architects like because it looks like a welcome and functions like an interrogation. "We're here to understand yesterday's incident," Rivera began. His voice carried the authority of a man who had carried stretchers before he carried votes. Crown Petrochemical sent 3 people, Victor, legal, and a PR director whose smile could have been installed by a contractor. Luis sat at the witness table, with Mira on one side and a union rep on the other who looked at him with the solidarity of men who clean up after speeches. "Mr. Hale," Rivera said, "describe the event in your words." Victor did. He didn't embellish, he didn't hide. He sounded like a man walking a tightrope strung between 2 buildings, labeled responsibility and damage control. "And this gentleman," Rivera nodded, toward Luis, "the man in the article." Victor turned. He met Luis's eyes as if trying out a new muscle, respect. "Mr. Ortega led the evacuation. He has—" Victor's mouth worked around a phrase it had not used often. "He has been raising concerns about the West Line." "Mr. Ortega," Rivera said, "your binder is famous." Light laughter, the kind that warms a room without making it unserious. "Will you walk us through it?" Luis opened his binder. He felt his hands steady as they touched the pages. "3 weeks ago, I noticed surface corrosion on the West Scrubber Tower casing. Hairline at first, progressive, pH strips in auxiliary drains showed acid. This is not normal with proper containment. He slid copies of photos and lab results forward. External lab confirmed HF in condensate. Meanwhile, trend data on shell temp and pump vibration showed drift. Not spikes, slides. Slides, Rivera repeated, tasting the word. Explain the difference so my constituents can understand without a glossary. A slide is a scream, Luis said. Everyone hears it and runs. A slide is a whisper that keeps going until it's the only sound left. Pen scratched. Cameras leaned in. The union rep made a noise that might have been a prayer or a laugh. Why are monitors late? Another council member asked. Placement, calibration, assumptions about how the system fails. Mira answered, not waiting to be called on, because sometimes authority is doing the right thing audibly. We need more ears. Rivera nodded. And management's response before the alarm? Luis did not look at Victor. I was told to mop. He let the sentence sit. He didn't need to add. The years behind it, he didn't need to add the years behind it. The room felt them anyway. There are moments when civic rooms remember why they were built. The air changed, a fraction of a degree, and people sat up straighter as if their spines had heard a whistle only they could interpret. Recommendations? Rivera asked. Mira slid a list forward like a prescription, her pen punctuating the table. Immediate, shut down and isolate West Line. External inspection for corrosion and microfractures. Replace gaskets and lines showing HF etching. Recalibrate and increase density of HF monitors. Add redundancy where slides happen. Short term, audit maintenance backlog. Reprioritize by risk, not schedule. Clear egress paths. Enforce with photos and
Short-term, audit maintenance backlog. Reprioritize by risk, not schedule. Clear egress paths. Enforce with photos and spot checks. Establish an anonymous hazard reporting system that does not route through chain of command sphere. Long-term, third-party process safety review. Community advisory panel with real teeth. Publish quarterly safety metrics in language that isn't a legal defense. Teeth, Rivera said. I like the metaphor. Teeth bite, gums smile. Victor rubbed his temple. We will shut the West Line today. We will do the external inspection. We will recalibrate monitors. And we will set up the reporting system. He let the last sentence find its own ending. Mr. Ortega will be part of it. The PR director shifted, a movement like a whisper. Are you sure? Victor didn't look left. He looked at Luis, who was suddenly very tired and very awake. I don't need a title. I need a way to be heard. You have it, Victor said. Rivera banged the gavel lightly. Then let's get to work before another camera has to show us who we forgot to listen to. Outside, in the heat that follows rain like a rumor, microphones materialized. A reporter asked Luis how it felt to be a hero. He didn't answer with false modesty. He also didn't audition for sainthood. It felt like doing what I was trained to do, he said, in a uniform that didn't match the training. If you've ever had your competence folded into a job title until it looked like a napkin, you know the relief of watching a city unfold it in public. By evening, Crown Petrochem issued a statement. It did not say everything. Statements never do. But it said enough to move action from promise to purchase order. The West Line went quiet. Contractors appeared with equipment that only comes out when people decide that waiting is not a strategy. In a small apartment with a view of a parking lot and a tree that had decided to live despite the soil, Luis sat at his table with his daughter, Anna, algebra between them and the TV muted on the news. She was 13, the age when justice becomes less theoretical and more like a measurement you want to understand with your own ruler.
They said your name, she said, not looking up from the problem. They did, he said. Do we get extra credit? She asked, deadpan. He laughed, which felt like a part of him remembering it had a job to. I'll write your teacher a letter, on letterhead. She snorted. Do you have letterhead? I know someone who does. He thought of Mira and her pen that bled through lies. The phone buzzed, an unknown number. He answered with the caution of a man who has learned that strangers often want impressions they didn't earn. Mr. Ortega. The voice was crisp, precise, like a blueprint read aloud. This is the Board of Process Safety Professionals. We heard about yesterday. We'd like to meet. He glanced at Anna, who was drawing a diagram in the margin that explained the problem better than the textbook did. I have time on Saturday, he said. We'll make it work, the voice said. He could hear the smile he trusted, small, respectful, unpolished. After he hung up, Anna tapped her pencil. Are we safe? She asked. He didn't lie. We're safer than we were yesterday, and tomorrow, if we do the work, we'll be safer than today. She nodded, accepting the answer adults give children when the truth is a road, not a destination. Across town, Nadia stood in her father's kitchen, the tile cool under her bare feet, a glass of water sweating in her hand. Victor leaned against the counter, sleeves rolled, the weight of a day pressing his shoulders down to their real height. You did the right thing, she said. Finally, he said, a rueful twist at the corner of his mouth. I did the thing I should have done when a man with a mop told me a sentence I didn't deserve to ignore. You can still fix it, she said. I can fix the plant. The rest, he gestured vaguely, encompassing years of posture, tone, the word tolerances uttered like a shield. The rest will take longer. He didn't know, and she couldn't tell him yet, that the rest would require a public act he had avoided his entire career, apology, without a comma. That night, the plant slept like a dog that had finally found the cool part of the floor. Monitors blinked, guards walked, the tower waited for hands with wrenches and welding masks to check the places where whispers had become the only sound. And in a folder on a kitchen table, under a lamp that made paper look like it could carry a city, sat a list that would become a plan because one man refused to go back to mopping in silence. The day after City Hall, the plant looked the same to people who drove past and judged safety by smoke that rose in neat lines. Inside, the air had changed. Attention has a weight, and when it arrives, everyone has to carry it. Victor called Luis into his office, a room arranged like a diagram of his career. Certificates on one wall, framed blueprints on another, a window that made the towers look smaller than they were. Shut the door, Victor said. His tone was not the tone he used on the control room floor. It had learned something from a gavel. Luis closed it and stood, binder against his hip like a shield he wasn't ready to set down. Legal wants to suspend you, Victor said, not easing into it. For violating chain of command, for taking samples without authorization, for speaking to counsel without clearance. Luis didn't blink. Do you? Victor exhaled. No. He rubbed a hand across his face as if smoothing a map. I want to put you where I should have months ago. In the room where hazard reports start, not where they go to be cleaned up. Job title? Luis asked. Not because he needed one, but because his landlord did. Process safety observer, Victor said. Temporary. We'll make it formal if I outlive the board meeting. Luis almost smiled. Observer is what they call people who see and aren't allowed to change things. Not this time, Victor said. You have authority to halt a line. In writing. He slid a draft across the desk. It wasn't letterhead yet, but the ink was fresh and legible. You answered to me and to the compliance chair, not to PR or legal. They'll hate it. That's how I'll know we're pointed right. They'll still come after me, Louise said, not as complaint, as forecast. Then I'll stand in front. You can hear sincerity in a room even when it's late to work. It walks different. It doesn't perform. It simply arrives. 2 hours later, legal called a meeting. Not the kind where coffee is offered, the kind where words like expose and liability are sharpened and passed around like knives. We have a rogue employee, legal said. We cannot set a precedent where janitors bypass systems. We have a system that made a janitor necessary, Victor said evenly. There are processes. There are, Mira agreed, and there is entropy. You built for the first and ignored the second. He documented it. The PR director slid a folder across the table. We've prepared talking points to reposition Mr. Ortega's actions as part of a robust internal culture of safety. He had to leave the culture to be heard, Nadia said from the doorway. She hadn't been invited. She came anyway. That was becoming a habit. We won't spin him into a mascot to protect our comfort. Legal pivoted. Then we discipline privately, quietly. No, Victor said. We promote publicly. He held up the signed memo. Effective today, Mr. Ortega has authority to halt operations when hazard criteria are met. He reports to me and compliance. If you need to write a memo too, write that one. Legal stared, calculating. Power is often a math problem. Variables, tolerances, and the occasional number nobody expected to show up. Luis walked into their equation and refused to cancel out. Retaliation did not end there, because it never does. Anonymous complaints appeared, styled as concern. Rumors about Luis's cast job loss circulated, curated by people who thought truth was what didn't hurt their friends. A contractor's supervisor remembered an incident Luis had not been present for. A shift lead suddenly recalled that Luis had tampered with the monitor by standing near it. Mira watched the swirl with the patience of someone who had watched floodwaters before. She said, they're trying to drown your credibility. We'll dam it with receipts. Receipts arrived from unlikely places. The independent lab published an open letter. Chain of custody robust, method sound, no conflict. 2 operators submitted anonymous corroborations through the new reporting system, identifying details redacted, timestamps precise. A retired inspector, nobody's ally by habit, wrote to the compliance chair. Observed etching consistent with HF prior to this week. Deferred in last audit at supervisor insistence. And then the email. Nadia found it at 1:13 a.m., eyes gritty, scrolling through a backup the IT department thought was too boring to protect. A message from a maintenance manager to a contractor. We'll push Westline replacement to next fiscal year. Optics matter. Keep the work orders open so the numbers look right. Paper compliance buys time. Paper compliance buys time. There are phrases that explain entire eras. That one explained why Luis had a new job. Nadia did not forward the email to legal. She printed it. She walked it to Victor's house and put it on his kitchen table between a bowl of oranges and a stack of mail he would never open. We can't bury this. Victor read the line, jaw tightening.
Victor read the line, jaw tightening. We won't. The board meeting was scheduled for Wednesday. It was supposed to be about earnings. It became about oxygen. The compliance chair opened with Mira's letter. Victor added the email. Legal advised executive session.
Rivera, invited as a guest, advised they keep the doors open. Cameras don't always corrupt. Sometimes they disinfect. "We failed to heed credible warnings," Victor said into a microphone that carried his voice farther than he deserved. "We deferred maintenance for optics. We put our neighbors at risk. That ends today." Silence. Then the chair cleared her throat. "Recommendations?" "We shut and inspect. We replace, not repair. We publish. We empower hazard reporters independent of chain of command. We bring in a third party to audit our backlog and our culture. And we make one more thing very clear. Retaliation ends. If we find it, we fire it." The CFO shifted, eyes on spreadsheets visible only to him. "Costs will be significant."
"So would funerals," Nadia said before she remembered there was a protocol about who could speak. The chair let it stand. Votes were taken, motions passed. Not all of them, enough of them. That night, in a union hall with bad acoustics and excellent coffee, a town hall convened. 200 chairs, 3 microphones, 1 question. Are we safe? The union president spoke. Rivera spoke. Mira spoke like a metronome set to urgency. Victor spoke last. "We misjudged," he said simply. "We listened to the wrong metrics. We will fix it. You will watch us fix it." He stepped aside. Luis stepped up. He did not adjust the microphone. He did not thank everyone for coming. He said what needed to be said in 22 words. "If you see something, say it. If they don't hear you, say it louder. If they still don't, I will." Sometimes leadership is a sentence that fits on a sticker. Inspections began with the noise like apologies being made out of metal, welders in moon visor masks, scaffolding that whispered the scale of the thing. Temporary lines rerouted flow while crews opened the parts of the plant that only ever appear on whiteboards and nightmares. The independent audit team arrived on a Monday with clipboards, cameras, and a demeanor that said they had been sued before and slept fine anyway. They were not there to be liked. They were there to be believed. They found what Mira had predicted: microfractures on flanges that had been painted over, gaskets etched like old teeth, monitors calibrated to hear someone else's disaster better than their own. They found a maintenance backlog sorted by convenience, not consequence. They found memos that read like literature, immaculate, persuasive, detached from the steel they were supposed to describe. The report used sentences that had scalpel energy. "We observe a cultural tendency to reframe emergent risk as compliance success by selectively emphasizing metrics that favor management objectives." Translated, "You have learned how to sound safe while courting danger." Victor read the pages with the flinchless attention of a man accepting a verdict he had avoided earning. He signed a purchase order that made the finance team pale, then signed another. The plant exhaled a little. Money is not morality, but it can fund it. Retaliation tried new shapes and failed at most of them. Someone left a note on Luis's locker. "Rat." He took a photo and filed it with HR, which now reported to compliance for matters of hazard reporting by board vote, a sentence that carried more weight than the person who wrote the note expected. Cameras were checked. Footage was clear. A supervisor was escorted out. Word spread like oxygen. Nadia launched the community advisory panel with a mix of grace and teeth. Meetings were public. Minutes were posted. The first agenda item was not cupcakes. It was evacuation path enforcement. Photos of blocked exits were blown up and taped to the wall like wanted posters. A maintenance lead tried to explain pallets. The room stared until he stopped. Luisa's new role came with the badge that didn't change his gait and a radio that did. He could call a halt. The first time he used it,
The room held its breath as if a storm might break. It didn't. Work paused, something was fixed, work resumed. The sky did not fall. The world survived a man without a degree on the wall saying the word stop. You would think that would be the end of the story. Systems change, men learn, paper gets harder to lie on. But stories that matter do not end when the good guys get business cards. A month in, an anonymous tip came through the new system that did not smell like fear. It smelled like duty. It said, East flare header showing pressure variance during night purges. Below alarm, above baseline. Not a spike, a slide. Luis read it twice. He felt the old pulse at his temple, adrenaline's quieter cousin. He walked the route at midnight with a flashlight and a young operator who had stopped calling him Sir after the third lap and started calling him Luis. They found the whisper. You can find them if you know what to listen for. A gauge that leaned wrong, a seam that sweated in weather that didn't call for sweat. He took notes. He took a sample. He filed the report. He called Mira because habit is what keeps you alive after one victory tries to turn you lazy. Again, she said, not surprised. Again, he said. Victor shut the header. He didn't argue this time. He didn't brief legal first. He briefed the people with wrenches. The audit team returned without being asked. They found a valve installed by a contractor with a reputation for low bids and late regrets. They found documentation that made it look like the valve had passed tests it had not taken. They found a signature that belonged to a man whose name would soon be familiar to the 6 o'clock news. News trucks returned to the gate line. Reporters practiced tones that made urgency feel like professionalism. Rivera held another hearing where he did not perform outrage because he didn't have to. Facts had finally learned how to carry themselves into rooms without costumes. Victor made a choice he would have avoided 6 months earlier. He named the contractor. He named the failure. He named the cost. He did not name excuses. He did not use the word tolerances. We are done with paper compliance. We are done with slides. We will listen for whispers before they become alarms. Mira sat at the back and allowed herself the smallest smile a woman like her ever permitted in public. It was not satisfaction. It was recognition. Systems were moving. Spines were stiffening. It would not last without effort, but it was happening. On a Saturday, Luis took Anna to the plant, not inside, but to the public overlook where families took photos during the holiday flare displays. He pointed at towers and pipes the way some fathers point at constellations. That line, he said, we made it safer. We? She said, test born into eyebrows. Me, Dr. Samey, Mr. Hale, the union, council, the neighbors, the lab tech with the neat handwriting, the guard who moved the pallets, the operator who filed the anonymous tip. He grinned. A lot of we. She nodded, then leaned her head on his shoulder for a moment that felt like a holiday invented on the spot. Are we done? She asked. Never, he said, and she didn't roll her eyes because she had learned something too. The kinds of stories worth telling end with work, not applause. The week the audit report landed, the city learned a new phrase, paper compliance. It fit into headlines with the satisfaction editors love. Talk radio fed on it, neighbors texted it like an inside joke they wished they hadn't earned. The plant existed in a new tense, continuous accountability. Luis discovered that being right has a price tag nobody posts. Reporters asked for interviews with a tone that offered flattery as currency. Old colleagues resurfaced with the wary camaraderie of veterans who had watched the same explosion in different towns. HR requested a routine review of his personnel file. Routine had a smell. He could always tell. Mira accompanied him to the HR meeting. She did not sit. She stood where the door couldn't close without hitting her shoulder. HR slid a single sheet across the table. Notice of role scope violation, it read, in font designed to feel inevitable. Provisional suspension pending review. Sign, HR said, while we formalize the new policy. Try it, Mira said, flat. Do it on camera. She held up her phone. Red dot. Say the words where Rivera can hear them. HR smiled, cracked by a millimeter. Policy closes 5 p.m. tomorrow. A beat. Mr. Ortega, your signature acknowledges receipt. My signature acknowledges I can read. It doesn't acknowledge I'm wrong. By 5 p.m., Mira said, decide if you're disciplining the person who prevented an evacuation. We'll bring chairs. On the way home, an unknown number rang. You ruined a friend's contract. Stay in your lane. Click. His neighbor texted a grainy photo, a sedan idling too long outside his building. Mira forwarded it to security and to Rivera in one motion. Rivera called back before the second ring. File the report, Rivera said. We'll post a patrol. Cameras will love this part of the story. Luis checked the deadbolt twice. He didn't scare easy. He didn't get careless either. Word of that line made its way to a newsroom. A segment aired. The janitor who refused to be a shield. Donations arrived at the community advisory panel with notes that said simply, keep going. In a different office, a different kind of attention gathered. The contractor identified in the audit hired counsel and a PR firm that specialized in the grammar of denial. They released a statement. We categorically deny. An email leaked. Ensure documentation aligns with contractual
An email leaked. Ensure documentation aligns with contractual representations. Translated, fix the paper, ignore the steel. Rivera referred the matter to the state attorney general. An investigation opened. Subpoenas arrived like weather. Men who had been certain began to rehearse uncertainty. Women who had been overlooked began to be asked the right questions. The change was not a miracle. It was a memo followed by a budget. Victor attended the union's safety committee meeting without a microphone or an entourage. He listened while a welder explained why the new valve procurement rules made sense in cubicles and nonsense on scaffolds. He took notes. He read them back. He changed the rule. Small acts of bureaucratic repentance don't trend. They do, however, move gauges. On a Friday night, Nadia took Louise and Mara to dinner at a place with cloth napkins and a policy of pretending the city outside was less complicated than it was. She raised the glass. To receipts, she said. And to spines, Mara added. Luis lifted his water. And to exits we keep clear. They laughed, and it held for a minute. Then Nadia's phone vibrated. She glanced, frowned, and turned it so they could see. A photo of Luis's locker. Door ajar, contents dumped. A single word in marker on the metal. Liar. Cameras? Mira asked, already standing. There, and working. By morning, the culprit had a name, a face, a signed confession, and a new status, unemployed. Not because the company had suddenly become holy, but because procedures had been updated to align with the ethics they had always claimed to honor. Retaliation wasn't gone. It had gotten expensive. The same morning, an email arrived from a name Luis had rehearsed forgiving but hadn't, his old supervisor from the firm that had let him take a fall. I owe you an apology, it began. Then, I won't ask you to understand. I will ask for a meeting. Luis closed the laptop. He stared at the ceiling. He didn't owe the past a chair at his table, but some ghosts were better dealt with in daylight. The storm rolled in like an old debt, slow, certain, louder than weather reports predicted. By midnight, the plant's floodlights turned halos into spears. Rain became its own agenda. The forecast had said gusts. The sky delivered fists. At 1:23 a.m., the grid hiccuped. It did not fail gracefully. Lights flickered. A generator coughed in the key of almost. Control room screens blinked and returned like men who had seen battle and decided to go back for a hat. "We're on backup," an operator said, voice steady because men like him practiced steadiness when nobody clapped. Alarms stayed quiet, too quiet. Systems built to scream rely on electricity to do it. Slides love the dark. Luis was already on site. Storm duty, a poncho that fought the wind and lost. He and a small crew moved through corridors that had become classrooms. You learned faster under pressure. He held a flashlight the way some hold a cross. "East header purge is scheduled." The radio crackled. "You want to hold?" "Hold," Luis said, without conferring. "Manual checks first." "Manual?" a young voice asked, not incredulous, just born late. "Eyes and hands," Luis said, "before electrons." They walked the line. They listened. They touched the casing with the backs of their hands the way old electricians taught them. They smelled the air the way paramedics do when a room tells the truth before the patient does. At the east header flare, Luis saw it. Not a leak, not a plume, a condensation pattern that had the geometry of mischief. He traced it with the light. The beam made meaning. He knelt, ran a gloved finger along a seam, held it to the rain. The drop slid wrong. "Shut," he said into the radio. "Now." "Protocol requires," a voice began, somewhere with a binder. "Shut," Luis repeated, and the voice remembered the memo that said he could. Valves turned. A sound like a decision traveled the pipe. The incident commander, a woman whose braid could have anchored a boat, appeared at his shoulder. "You see it?" "I see enough," he said. "So do I," she replied. "We'll stage on the leeward side. If this goes south, we don't make firefighters into headlines." They moved. They called. They waited in ways that weren't passive. The backup generators held. The wind leaned and considered a different victim. The rain lost interest and moved on to punish a suburb that voted against stormwater upgrades. At 3:08 a.m., the grid returned with the reluctant grace of a cat. Screens filled. Alarms tested themselves. The plant took a breath. By dawn, a contractor stood by the header with a wrench and a face like someone who wanted the steel to apologize. Mira arrived without an umbrella, hair a manifesto. "Good call," she said to Luis, which, coming from her, was a ribbon pinned with a nail. Victor appeared soaked from a walk he did not delegate. He looked at the header, then at Luis. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," Luis replied. "Write it down, fix it, fund it." Victor nodded. "I already did the first. I'm doing the second. The third will upset people who deserve to be upset." News of the near miss did not leak. It was shared deliberately at a morning briefing with the advisory panel in attendance. Transparency isn't a virtue until it's practiced when you could get away without it. Rivera spoke first. "He held the line," he said. Literally. He looked at the crew. "You did your job. The system let you. That's new." Nadia posted a summary online with enough detail to be credible and enough restraint to be responsible. Comments did what comments do. Some thanked, some accused, some demanded. The city's heartbeat felt less erratic. The board scheduled a press conference, not to brag, to admit. A podium,
2 flags, a list of actions that were not promises, but purchases. Victor stepped up, paper in hand, throat cleared, eyes steady. He did not bring a smile. He brought a sentence he had practiced until it lost its polish. "I'm sorry." He let it sit. No comma, no clause to soften it, no because to suggest a shared burden. Cameras recorded the rarest event in corporate life, a man with power choosing to be smaller than the damage he had helped cause. We ignored credible warnings. We deferred necessary work. We spoke in phrases that made danger sound acceptable. I am responsible. We are changing how we listen and how we act. Here's what we have done and what we will do. He listed shutdowns, replacements, audits, the authority vested in hazard reporters, the end of retaliation made enforceable by policy with teeth. He named the contractor failures. He named the internal memos that treated optics like oxygen. He announced funding for a process safety institute at the community college to be led by a woman who wrote a letter that started with observations and ended with a different city. Dr. Saini has agreed to serve as director. Mira's face did not change. Her eyes softened by 1 degree. He turned to Luis. "Mr. Ortega will chair the community advisory panel. He will also train our crews in observational discipline. He has been right when it mattered, more than pride." Reporters ask the questions they are paid to ask. Lawsuits? Stock? Shareholder revolt? Victor answered with numbers when numbers were called for. He answered with sentences when sentences could carry something numbers could not. "Why now?" one asked, a fair question asked with unfair timing. Because delay was killing decency. Later, in a hallway that smelt like sweat and relief, the old supervisor from Luis's past waited, hat in hand, eyes humbler than pride usually allows. "Luis," he said. "Miguel," Luis replied. He did not extend a hand. Not yet. "I signed a lie," he said. "I did it because I was told to, and because I thought the machine would eat me if I didn't. It ate you instead." "It ate both of us," Luis said. "I just had to change jobs to notice." "I am cooperating with the investigation," Miguel said. "I'm naming names. Mine first." He swallowed. "I don't want forgiveness. I want to be useful." Luis studied the man. He saw a person who had built a life out of competence and then rented it to fear. He saw a man trying to buy it back with receipts. "Be useful," Luis said. "Bring receipts and apologize to the kids you taught to be brave until it cost something." Miguel nodded, eyes wet in a way men of their age had not been trained to permit. The Attorney General announced charges against the contractor executives for falsified documentation. It was not a triumph, it was a correction, the kind of thing people mistake for justice because it has courtrooms in it. Justice would be measured in air and exits, in alarms that went off before the wind shifted, in a generation of operators who learned to love the word stop. The institute opened in a building that used to sell tires. Mira chose it on purpose. Safety is about traction. Let's start where people understand that. The ribbon was cut by hands that had held wrenches. The plaque carried names that had once been relegated to footnotes. A poster on the wall read, "Documentation is care." Anna stood at the back holding a program, watching her father speak without rehearsing pride. He talked about slides and spikes. He talked about whispers. He talked about the dignity of shutting things down and the humility of starting them back up only when they deserved it. 2 lives were saved here, he said, and the room turned. One from a chemical that doesn't negotiate, another from the kind of pride that likes microphones. He didn't say whose. He didn't have to.
The state hearing was held in a room designed by someone who believed mahogany made men honest. Rows of chairs, a dais, pitchers of water that tasted like pipes older than the people sipping. Names were read into the record with a formality that dressed facts in suits. Contractor executives sat beside lawyers who had built careers converting accountability into ambiguity. The Attorney General's team laid out a timeline that could have been a crime novel if it weren't so precisely dull. Procurement schedules, calibration logs, signatures that appeared on days the signers were in different zip codes. Boredom is where corruption often hides, counting on the rest of us to look away. Mira testified first. She did not perform expertise. She displayed it, like a clean tool laid on a workbench. Explain hydrofluoric acid to those in this room who think chemistry ended in high school, the chair said. It is a ghost with teeth. You won't see it. You will feel what it takes. We use it because we want what it gives. We owe it the respect we give a loaded gun. Luis followed. He brought the binder, not as prop, but as spine. He described slides and whispers. He named drain traps and pH strips. He told the truth in a cadence that resisted drama, because facts didn't need a costume. Why didn't you go through proper channels? The contractor's lawyer asked, voice sugared. I did. Proper channels were clogged. Were you seeking attention? I was seeking oxygen. The room exhaled an involuntary sound that hearings try to prevent. Even the mahogany softened. Victor testified after lunch. He did not bring a defense. He brought receipts. He talked about tolerances he had used like spells. He named the memo that had belonged to his culture. Paper compliance buys time. He said the sentence that makes enemies and allies in equal measure. I should have listened to the janitor. The contractor CEO tried charm, then confusion, then martyrdom. The hearing notes, later released, recorded none of that. They recorded emails, invoices, and the physical laws that do not care about business cycles. At the end of the day, the chair said something hearings rarely say. Thank you. It was addressed to Mira and Louis and the union rep with hands nicked by years that the HR files didn't track. It was also, if unintentionally, addressed to a city that had decided it would rather be annoyed by truth than surprised by funerals. Recognition ceremonies are dangerous. They can sand the edges off hard work until it fits in a frame. They can turn engines into ornaments. But sometimes they repair a story that was bent on purpose. The Process Safety Institute's first graduating class assembled in a warehouse that still smelt like rubber and reinvention. 50 students. A siren test blared from the plant downriver, unscheduled. Heads turned. The room held. On the stage, a display case sat draped in cloth. The mayor cleared his throat for a speech. Rivera held up a hand. Skip it. He nodded to Mira. We aren't honoring miracles. We're honoring discipline that looks boring until the day it buys you breath. Nadia stepped forward and pulled the cloth. Inside the case, a battered 3-ring binder, edges swelled with rain and time, pages warped by use. A label read, "The binder that wouldn't shut up." People laughed, then stopped like people do when they realize the joke is a doorway. This belongs to the Institute, not because paper is magic, because writing is an act of care. This binder is proof that care can be louder than titles. She turned to Louis.
It's yours if you want it to be. It's ours if you let it be. Lewis looked at the case. He remembered nights when the binder had been a pillow between him and doubt. He remembered the morning he had used it as an umbrella for a child whose father's face he never saw. He nodded. It's ours. Keep it in the light. Applause. Not the kind that ends a show, the kind that begins a shift. Victor was there, in a suit that fit differently since the day he learned how to be smaller. He did not sit in the front row. He stood in the back next to a guard whose job description didn't mention dignity, but whose posture did. Outside, two investors heckled, "Safety theater." Nadia didn't raise her voice. She said, "Come inside," pointing to the binder, or stand out here and call discipline a show. They didn't enter. Cameras did. After Victor approached Lewis, Union Maintenance Director, starts Monday. Proaxity is over. Lewis nodded. Then publish the backlog with dates. Let the city watch the clock. Victor exhaled. We will. 6 months later, the West Line looked new because it had been paid for in public. Exits stayed clear. Monitors listened where whispers live. The backlog read like an honest diary. Dates, fixes, signatures that match bodies. Contractor executives pled to crimes that sounded mild on paper and sharp in life. Fines became scholarships. One executive faced a classroom and said, "I made later into a policy." He didn't get applause. He got questions. Rivera won re-election on a platform nobody prints on yard signs. Calibration, training, inspection hours. The storm that followed found a city that rehearsed. Mira ran the institute like a clinic. Observation, repetition, consequences for non-adherence. She wrote slides and spikes. It didn't trend, it traveled. Nadia launched a portal that asked for evidence before names. Submissions tripled, hazards dropped. DIY courage became policy. Lewis kept walking nightlines. He calibrated eyes. He tuned hands. He taught voices to use the sharpest professional word available: stop. On a Tuesday that started gray and ended gold, Anna stood before her class with a model of a plant made from cardboard and stubbornness. She explained slides and spikes. She explained whispers. She explained why her father carried a notebook and why she would too, in whatever room she grew up to guard. She said, "Sometimes the greatest revenge is a city that refuses to be surprised by its preventable dead." At sunset, Lewis locked the service closet where the mop still lived. He didn't hate it. It had paid rent when his degree could not. He touched the handle the way you touch a relic that deserves respect but not worship. He stepped into the hallway. The air smelled like solvents and something else. Normalcy earned the hard way. He walked past the camera that had once made him visible and waved, a joke to himself, a nod to a lens that, on one wet, wind-shifted morning, had chosen a different kind of story. If you've ever been underestimated because of your job title or your last name or the way people decided to see you, you know that documentation is not just paper. It is a promise to yourself, to the people who breathe near you, to the city that prefers to be annoyed by its guardians than to mourn its preventable dead. 2 lives were saved that season, one from a chemical that does not negotiate, one from a pride that had to learn it wasn't a synonym for leadership, and a third, if you count the city that learned to love the word stop. Reform has a half-life. It decays when not fed. The board learned this the week a hedge fund filed a letter with language sharpened for a courtroom but delivered to a newsroom. Crown Petrochem's leadership has engaged in value-destructive overreach under the guise of safety theater. Safety theater. The phrase traveled through inboxes like a cough on a train. Commentators picked it up because it clicked on screens. The fund proposed a slate to replace Victor with an operator known for discipline and efficiency, adjectives that often hide austerity. The math looked persuasive if you didn't include funerals, cost curves, downtime graphs, shareholder return. The letter even used slides and spikes, but in service of a different conclusion. The company had overcorrected. Investors wanted tolerances back. Nadia read the letter in silence, then forwarded it to Rivera and Mira with a subject line that didn't waste punctuation. They're coming. Let them, Mira replied. Bring receipts. Receipts arrived, some printed, some breathing. The union compiled a dossier. Near misses avoided since reforms, time to repair metrics cut by half, evacuation path violations reduced to 0 after 3 months of enforcement and fines that stung. The Institute produced early outcomes, 120 trainees, 14 hazard reports intercepted pre-incident, 1 dramatic save that didn't make the news because the alarm didn't need to. Lewis sat with compliance and finance. They built a graph that should have been obvious to anyone who had ever paid a bill and breathed. Cost of shutdowns less than cost of catastrophe. It wasn't a slogan. It was a ledger with line items named after things you couldn't negotiate with. Air, water, time. The shareholder meeting moved to the Civic Center because the usual ballroom didn't want the cameras. The hedge fund's representative wore confidence like a blazer. He delivered a speech that coaxed applause from people who preferred their money quiet. Victor followed. He didn't bring charisma. He brought a spreadsheet everyone could read and a sentence everyone could remember. Discipline isn't cutting corners. It's rounding them you never had the right to call straight. He yielded the mic to a rank-and-file operator who had never spoken at a shareholder meeting. The operator, Jay, mid-30s, calm as a winter pond, described a midnight shut he had called without fear of retaliation. He described going home to a toddler who woke up because the furnace started wrong and knew his father would know what to do. He did, because the plant taught him to listen for whispers and to say, stop. Then Nadia. She didn't use slides. She used a photo of a pallet blocking an exit from a year ago and a photo of the same door, clear and clean, from last week. This is return on investment. This is value. The vote was closer than comfort. It passed anyway. Victor stayed. The slate failed. The fund issued a statement about long-term engagement. Translation, we'll be back when people get tired.
We don't get tired, Mira said. Less a prediction than a prescription. At 9 a.m. on the Tuesday, sirens sounded on purpose. The drill was announced, then staged with surprise. 1,000 bodies practiced the choreography none of them wanted to perform for real. Drills are theater. Good ones are documentary. Luis stood with a clipboard he didn't need to look at. He watched for bottlenecks, for confusion, for the ways human beings trip on each other when fear tightens the mind's hallway. The incident commander ran the script. Radios crackled, doors swung, forklifts idled in place like obedient beasts. At the east gate, a jam formed. Not pallets, not this time. People. A supervisor tried to funnel 3 streams into one out of habit. Habits are often just unexamined impatience. Open gate 2, Luis called. Now. It's a drill, the supervisor said, as if practice exempted reality from rules. All the more reason, Luis said, and the gate rolled, and the jam dissolved. City observers from the fire department took notes. Rivera watched from the perimeter with a coffee and a stopwatch. Mira roved like a hawk looking for mice. She found 3, a door that swung inward, a sign that contradicted another sign, and a radio dead zone under a staircase. Fix them before lunch. The post-drill debrief took place in the cafeteria because accountability tastes better with salt. Everyone stood. No microphones. Jay spoke. A janitorial lead spoke, the woman whose team had quietly become logistics savants. They moved bodies and cleared paths for a living. "We need floor tape," she said. "Not for OSHA, for brains. People follow lines when they're scared." "Done," Victor said. Honest class came as observers, clipboard smaller, but standards high. They asked why a map in one hall didn't match the map in another. They asked why the alarm sound was painful in one building and merely annoying in another. They asked why the assembly point didn't have shade. "Shade," a manager repeated, caught between defensiveness and curiosity. "People pass out," Anna said. "Then you have two emergencies." The manager blinked. "Shade," he wrote. The drill report landed with actions assigned and timelines that did not include later. The institute turned it into a case study, the day we practiced on purpose. It became a required reading for new hires. It became a ritual. Practice, debrief, fix, repeat. Boredom weaponized for good. Word traveled beyond the river. A refinery 3 states over asked Mira and Lewis to consult. Different accents, same physics. They flew coach because that is what decency does when it has a travel budget. The plant was older, the culture too. They met a director who said all the right sentences with a smile that liked mirrors. They met an operator who, after the meeting, slit them a napkin with 3 words: South Tank Farm. They walked the tank farm at dusk with a foreman who survived enough weather for 2 men. He pointed with a wrench. He said, "We patch, we paint, we pray." "Add document," Lewis said. They found a whisper. You always do, when someone hands you a napkin. They recommended a shutdown. The director resisted. The board hesitated. The community did not. Rivera had called his counterpart across state lines. The union had friends who knew friends. The napkin became testimony. The plant shut. A seam failed on inspection 2 days later, with a sound that would have been a headline if not for timing. The director issued a statement about proactive diligence. Mira did not correct him in public. She wrote a note in her book. Credit is a mirror. Make sure it faces the crowd. Luis visited the foreman before flying home. "You saved a day none of us will see," he said. The foreman shrugged. "I like boring nights." He handed Luis the wrench. "For your wall." Luis didn't have a wall for trophies. He put the wrench in his bag anyway. It felt like a binder made of steel. Depositions are theater without an audience. Fluorescent lights, water and sweating pitchers, a court reporter whose fingers make meaning out of nerves. The contractor case moved to this stage where intimidation dresses as courtesy. Luis sat across from a lawyer who had learned to make questions into traps. Mira sat to his left, not to answer, but to anchor. "Mr. Ortega," the lawyer began, "how many times have you been disciplined in your career?" "Once, for refusing to sign that work was complete when it wasn't." "And you were terminated." "I was scapegoated, then rehired by a different conscience." "Objection." Opposing counsel said for form. The court reporter typed neutrality. The lawyer pivoted. "You collected samples without authorization, correct?" "I collected truth," Lewis said. "Authorization came later." Mira's hand didn't touch his elbow. It didn't need to. He was on the line, but he wasn't crossing it. Miguel testified next. He brought a folder of emails that slept in a drawer behind socks. He wore a suit that didn't fit and contrition that did. "Why now?" the lawyer asked, tone bored, as if the moral question could be cross-examined. "Because I heard an alarm that didn't sound, and I saw a man I hurt refuse to enjoy my pain." The transcript would later read, "Witness wept." It would not capture the room recalibrating by a degree. Victor's deposition was last. He did not ask for breaks. He did not decorate sentences. He answered like a man who had discovered that plain language was his last luxury. "You admit negligence?" "I admit decisions that privileged optics over safety. Negligence is your word. I have my own." "And your culture tolerated falsification." "My culture rewarded people who made problems quiet. We are changing the reward." When it ended, the court reporter flexed her fingers and smiled at no one in particular.
People seldom remember that she writes history with her hands. On a Thursday, a recruiter with a marble name called. Global safety lead, travel, money that repainted lives. Deadline, 48 hours. Luis looked at Anna's flyer on the fridge. Science fair, Friday, 7 p.m. He walked it to Mira. Loading dock bench? Take it if it lets you do the work. Decline it if it turns you into a mascot. He called Nadia. If I leave, does it stand? Yes, but it stands taller if you're here. He called the recruiter. I'll consult. License our materials. Pay the institute. Post your first drill video by next month, or we're done. Silence. Then, deal. He made Anna's fair. She pointed to a model tower that whistled when a seam failed. The point, she said into a borrowed mic, is to hear before you hurt. Victor, hearing about the offer, raised janitorial pay. Infrastructure, he wrote. The CFO found the money because fear had been replaced by math. The alert hit phones at 4:17 p.m. Not Crown. A plastics plant upriver. Pungent smoke. Unknown release. Shelter in place advised for 3 neighborhoods, including the block where the institute hosted a workshop and the elementary school across the street dismissed early. Confusion arrived in familiar livery. Parents ran. Cars clogged. Someone shouted the word leak with the cadence of accusation. Lewis was at the institute, mid-lecture on documentation that saves time when time is stingy. He didn't finish his sentence. He started a different one. We have a plan. The institute's drill folder, boring until celebrated, opened, windows closed, HVAC shifted to recirculate, doors sealed. Kids moved to interior rooms in lines that followed tape that had been laid after Anna's comment about brains and lines. Snacks appeared, because Mira had a rule: fear burns calories. Across the street, the school principal called Nadia because that's what happens when you earn your number in a crisis. Crown's Logistics sent box fans with filters. Janitorial rolled plastic and tape. A maintenance lead arrived with a cart that might as well have been a lifeboat. Rivera went live on local TV. Calm, specific. If you are in the affected zones, stay inside, seal windows. If you smell sweet, don't be reassured. That's not safety, that's chemistry. The plume passed like a bully rethinking its options. The shelter lifted at 5:02 p.m. No injuries. The news ran an interview with a parent who used the word miracle. Mira corrected her gently on air. It wasn't a miracle. It was practice and tape. The plastics plant later admitted to aging equipment and a valve stuck half open on a line that had not been audited since before anyone wanted to use the phrase paper compliance at dinner. Depositions are theater without an audience. Fluorescent lights, water and sweating pitchers, a court reporter whose fingers make meaning out of nerves. The contractor case moved to this stage, where intimidation dresses as courtesy. Luis sat across from a lawyer who had learned to make questions into traps. Mira sat to his left, not to answer, but to anchor. Mr. Ortega, the lawyer began, how many times have you been disciplined in your career? Once. For refusing to sign that work was complete when it wasn't. And you were terminated. I was scapegoated, then rehired by a different conscience. Objection, opposing counsel said for form. The court reporter typed neutrality. The lawyer pivoted. You collected samples without authorization. Correct. I collected truth.
The Institute's wall had a new line after Mara's first stand down. Practice is love. Anna didn't roll her eyes. Her essay, Systems and Spines, lost to a photo with lab coats. She framed the judge's notes. Feedback is a tool, she wrote underneath. Mira taught with the precision of triage. She named the enemy, indifference. She prescribed the cure, procedure. Luis kept his notebooks, dates on spines, a small brass plate on the shelf, expectation. Because that is what the city had learned to hold. Alarms early, exits clear, mops that carry maps, apologies without commas, budgets written in air and time. If you've ever tried to change a system, you know the win isn't applause. It's rooms that treat vigilance like weather, constant, boring, life-saving. The binder stayed in its case, pages slightly open as if still breathing. The wrench hung in a classroom where hands could touch it before quizzes. The camera at the gate filmed boredom on purpose. 2 lives had been saved and then some. A city learned the right words: stop, document, practice, expect. And when the rain came again, as it always does, the lines held. It happened on live TV, a town hall, bright lights, a contractor's chemist with perfect hair and a PowerPoint. He called the lab report compromised. He said contamination. He said chain of custody irregular. He said the words with a smile built for cameras. Mira didn't smile. She said split sample, 2 labs, blind labels, sealed by a notary you contributed to last election. Gasps love receipts. The moderator blinked. Do you have the second result? In 10 minutes, Mira said. Couriers on foot. She turned to the audience. We can also test now. Crude, real. She held up a pH strip and a jar labeled Ox Drain, date in time in thick ink. The chemist scoffed. That's theater. So is denial. Ours comes with numbers, Mira said. Luis stepped to the table. He dipped the strip. The color shifted hard. The camera zoomed. The moderator read the comparison chart on air. Acid. The chemist said, calibration error. He pushed the word like a life raft. The courier burst through the doors, breathless, envelope raised. The moderator opened it. Second lab confirms, he read. The numbers tilted toward truth. The chemist tried one more time. Context matters. So do lungs, Luis said. Rivera stood up. We will not litigate physics. We will fix steel. He banged the gavel once. The broadcast cut to commercial. Ads sold pickup trucks and insurance. The city bought time. Midnight, a week after the drill. The new system screamed. HF alarm, East Corridor. A tone that crawled under skin and rewired breathing. Execute, Luis said over the radio. No debate. Doors sealed, masks on, egress paths cleared in a choreography nobody wanted to practice and did anyway. Mira answered on the first ring. Sensor placement? New install, cold spot, Luis said, moving fast, counting heartbeats like head count. The incident commander traced wind on a map with a finger that didn't shake. Leeward staging, no heroics. 2 operators reached the panel, readouts shaky. Temperature inversion visible on the chart like a lie wearing a winter coat. Confirm with second sensor, Luis said. The echo came back clean. No release, Mira said. Inversion fooled the first ear. Procedure said stand down slowly. They did. Radios quieted, people did not. At 01:23, a supervisor suggested skipping the incident report to avoid noise. Luis turned. Noise is what kills people. He filed the report himself, CC'd compliance, union, Rivera. The policy replied like a hammer. Reports are mandatory. Suppression is termination. By 02:10, a contractor replaced the sensor with one that didn't believe in ghosts. Training added a slide. How to spot inversions before they spot you. In the morning briefing, Victor spoke first. He said, false alarm. True procedure. No one clapped. No one needed to. That night, the city slept through another rehearsal they never knew they attended, and the camera at the gate filmed boredom like a blessing.